sort of the custom is that when then the senior, the monk comes in, we're all supposed to stand until he sits, and then we sit. So when he walks in, if you feel so inclined, please stand, and then we'll sit when he sits, and we'll get started once he comes in. We have another person coming. I don't know. I see a cushion and an arm, but the head is like the head is like right behind the pillar, so I can't see who it is. Oh, it's Abe. Abe or Abel? Hey. So welcome everyone. It's good to see y'all here. Another Tuesday, another third Tuesday, another parable or story for us. And so we started talking about the Four Noble Truths. Last week we talked about dukkha, often translated as suffering, but as we discussed last week, dukkha is so much more. It's not just suffering, it's longing, it's craving, it's reaching, it's striving. It's the emptiness you feel inside. All right? All those are forms of dukkha. And what we're then striving to do is to transcend dukkha, while keeping in mind that dukkha is part of the very fabric of the universe. That wishing for utopia is just that, a wish, because inherent in how this universe is created is the thread of dukkha. And so when you accept that, okay, it's okay that we suffer because it's part of the universe. It's part of my universe because I'm a manifestation of this universe. So I am going to suffer. And so there's a peace that comes with knowing that. There's nothing wrong with the fact that it's suffering. It's just something that we want to transcend. And one way to transcend that is to use your suffering as a tool, to use your suffering as a way of transformation, of learning, of going beyond. Today's parable is based on a very famous parable that's been told for a couple thousand years, maybe. But it's been around for quite some time in different forms and gets its retelling also in different forms as well. So let me give you all the overall picture, the big picture of what we're going to be doing here today. We're going to start first with a guided meditation. I use this guided meditation as just a very simple practice that you can do on your own wherever. We're going to focus first on the sounds and the sensations outside of your body. Then you'll focus on the sensations within your body, and then we'll return back to focusing on the external, and then take 3 deep breaths. And I forgot to mention, we start with 3 breaths. When you take your breath, the first 3 breaths, try to make the exhalation longer than the inhalation. The act of sort of shifting the breath in that way actually has a cumulative calming effect. Our body tends to calm down when we exhale and tends to energize when we inhale. It just activates different parts of our brain. So those 3 deep breaths, the inhalation short, the exhalation longer, and then after those 3 breaths, just let your breath go. Let it do whatever it needs to do. You don't need to control it. After we do that short guided meditation, we'll have Leon read the parable. Then we'll go back and we'll do a short 8 to 10 minute meditation. And this time, instead of focusing on the breath, focus on what arises in you as you sit with the parable. And notice I don't say just think about the parable, because you want to do more than just think. You really want to kind of just immerse yourself in the feeling, the thoughts, any sensations, anything that's sort of the experience of the parable. All right. Then after that meditation, we'll open it up to just group discussions. What are some of the things that came to you? What questions do you have? What comments? What new insights? And then we'll end our service for today after that. Okay. Good. So I want to thank the temple for allowing us to meet here. I want to thank Master Tik Fu Quang, the abbot of the temple, for allowing us to practice here. I want to thank Master Tik Kwan Tri for also being here with us today. If we're lucky, he will share some of his wisdom with us. He is one of the monks here, and then you will, if you ever come to the Sunday services, you'll get a chance to also see him teach there. Anything else I may have forgotten? We're good to go, right? Good. So get in a comfortable position, a position where you are comfortable enough to be still for a while, but not so comfortable that you fall asleep. Take 3 deep breaths, each one slower than the last. When you're ready, let go of the breath and focus on the sensations outside your body, the sounds, the air conditioning, my voice, movement. Just focus on the sensations outside the body. Be present. When you're ready, focus on the sensations within your body. Focus on how it feels to breathe. Maybe even notice the beating of your heart. Be present. When you're ready, focus once again on the sensations outside of your body. Be present. When you're ready, take 3 deep breaths and open your eyes. Now take this moment to not only listen to this parable, but to also experience it.
Good evening, everyone. As Alex said, I'm going to read a story for you tonight following our theme of dukkha. This is a story about a woman who lived in the time of the Buddha and was dealing with what many might say is one of the greatest, most painful experiences of your life, which is the loss of a loved one. So it's just some interesting circumstances in here. As you read the story, just consider what she was going through and the things that were going through her mind. This is the story of Skinny Gotami and the mustard seed. After flowing on for 100,000 ages, she evolved in this Buddha era among gods and men and a poor family in Savatthi. Her name was Gotami Tissa, but because her body was very skinny, she was called Skinny Gotani. When she went to her husband's family, she was scorned and called daughter of a poor family. Then she gave birth to a son, and with the arrival of the son, she was treated with respect. But that son, running back and forth, running all around while playing, met his end. Because of this, sorrow to the point of madness arose in her. She thought, before I was one who received only scorn, but starting from the time of the birth of my son, I gained honor. These relatives will now try to take my son in order to expose him outside in the charnel ground. Under the influence of her sorrow to the point of madness, she took the dead corpse on her hip and wandered in the city from the door of one house to another, pleading, "Give me medicine for my son." People reviled her, saying, "What good is medicine?" But she did not grasp what they were saying. And then a certain wise man, thinking, "This woman has had her mind deranged by sorrow for her son. The 10-powered Buddha will know the medicine for her." And he said, "Mother, having approached the fully awakened one, ask about medicine for your son." She went to the Vihara at the time of the teaching of Dharma and said, "Blessed one, give medicine to me for my son." The master, seeing her situation, said, "Go, having entered the city, into whatever house has never before experienced any death, and take from them a mustard seed." "Very well, sir," she replied. And glad of mind, she entered the city and came to the first house. "The master has called for a mustard seed in order to make medicine for my son. If this house has never before experienced any death, give me a mustard seed." "Who is able to count how many have died here? Then keep it. What use is that mustard seed to me?" And going to a second and a third house, her madness left her and her right mind was established, thanks to the power of the Buddha. She thought, "This is the way it will be in the entire city. By means of the Blessed One's compassion for my welfare, this will be what is seen." And having gained a sense of spiritual urgency from that, she went out and covered her son in the charnel ground. She uttered this verse, "It's not just a truth for one village or one town, nor is it a truth for a single family, but for every world settled by gods and men, this is indeed what is true, impermanence." And so saying, she went into the presence of the master. Then the master said to her, "Have you obtained, Gotami, the mustard seed?" "Finished, sir, is the matter of the mustard seed," she said. "You have indeed restored me." And the master then uttered this verse, "A person with a mind that clings, deranged, to sons or possessions, is swept away by the death that comes, like mighty flood to a sleeping town." At the conclusion of this verse, confirmed in the fruit of the stream entry, she asked the master for permission to go forth into the homeless life, to become a nun. The master allowed her to go forth. She gave homage to the master by bowing 3 times, went to join the community of nuns, and having gone forth, received her ordination. It was not long before, through the doing of deeds with careful attention, she caused her insight to grow, and she became an arahant.
So now we will meditate on this parable. Focus on more than just thinking, but experiencing the parable.
we need to?
I think we can just open it up. Okay. So, this is your time then to sort of just express what the experience of that parable was like. So I'll open it up. Whoever wants to begin.
I'd like to begin if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I understood the parable, but I'd still like to share my insight. I was sitting here in meditation, imagining that I was the mother of that child, and I was approaching each door, and I was given this task to attain a mustard seed from someone that has never been touched by death. I was frantic and desperate, approaching the first house, and every house that I approached and I left, I was let down. And I was realizing that every house that I went to has been touched by death in some way, and I started to lose hope. It was like I was going through the grieving process. It's like I was going through disbelief, and then I was going through anger, and then in the end, like I had reached acceptance. I don't know all the stages, but in the end I had reached acceptance, and I realized, like, oh my gosh, no matter what house I go to, I'm not going to be able to get this mustard seed. I need to come to a place of acceptance for what is, and let go of what it is that I feel like I need to have in this moment. And that was hard to accept. I can't remember what else I was going to tell you guys, but it was just that whole process of just going from disbelief and then finally coming to acceptance and realizing that I had to accept what is rather than grasping something that I thought that I needed to attain. And there was a lot of freedom in that. And whenever I finally got to the final house and realized, like, I can't even get this mustard seed, I got to a place of acceptance and letting go. And then that's whenever, like, the healing was able to start for me. So I was going to share some other things, but
It'll come later. Good. I like that. Thank you for sharing that.
I also went through the stages of grief when I was thinking about that, because I take people through the stages of grief in counseling, and so that crossed my mind, but I could not make myself experience the story. It's too profound of a loss, and I just couldn't do it.
Mm.
You know, when you're a mother, it's unthinkable, and I couldn't bring myself to do it, but I finally was able, what I felt, and I think what really finally resonated with me was when you said, the only truth is impermanence. Then that's when I was able to experience it.
I
Thank
wonder
you.
what y'all think about one thing that struck me when I was reading this version is how, because I was a skinny kid. I got teased for being skinny too. I know what that's like. But then she had her son, right? And all of a sudden her family's given her respect. I'm wondering if she mistakenly felt like her worth was in her son rather than in her own self. So there was something going on there. It's almost like, yes, he was her son. I'm sure he loved her, but she represented all of this respect that she was now getting from the family.
Mm-hmm.
And if the child went away, that respect would also go away. And that's just a part of it that, to set it all up, that made it kind of interesting to me.
So maybe like her grief was double. Obviously, the
Yeah,
loss of her son,
'cause
that's obvious,
yes.
but then also the loss of what she perceives as respect now that I didn't have before. So she's doubly,
double loss.
If we look at interconnection and like someone's belief in themselves, their self-worth, I think there has to do a lot, like there's a lot at play, like a whole family network can believe that someone is low self-worth, or like caste systems will believe that someone's low self-worth. So breaking out of that bond can be very difficult, because it's almost like everyone's brainwashed into labeling this person a certain way.
And then she brainwashed herself into being, oh, I'm worthwhile and accepted now. Like, she's the same person she was before. So that was happening in her own mind.
I don't know if this is relatable, but when I've been talking with Master Quan Tri about the first noble truth about dukkha, and yeah, everything obviously is impermanent. Every person is impermanent unless you're the Highlander. But it's like, what are we supposed to do about our kids? Because there's not a parent in this room that doesn't say, my child is my world. And it is something like, obviously they grow up, they're not the same kid they were, they're not the same moody teen they were. And like I look at pictures of them, and you know, everyone does like, oh, I wish they were like that, or I remember this, I remember when they were that small, everything like that. And if I've understood Master Quan Tri correctly, that is a form of suffering, because you're holding on to what they were. And that's what this mother did, granted to a more extreme. She's holding on to a child that was once alive and now isn't. So it's like, how do you avoid the dukkha of your child growing up, or in this instance, going, without being like a cold parent and not being like, it was bound to happen. Like, that's what I've been struggling with the most.
Thank you.
Do you think sometimes people hold on to grief for some reason? Maybe they feel that like that gives them some worth or value. You know, like in this parable, she went from house to house to house, and she couldn't find a single home that hadn't been touched by death or loss or whatever. But sometimes I wonder if people, we hold on to grief so we can say, well, this is all mine. No one knows, you know, this type of suffering. But the truth is, we all know some sort of suffering. But maybe that just sometimes makes people feel worthy or valued. You know, carry this burden, such a burden, but not realizing, well, all of us carry some sort of burden. I apologize.
No, that's very insightful. That's good.
Just to, I guess, maybe look at it from a different perspective, because I sometimes feel like the parables of people who have a change of heart, and that's all stories really, but we tend to kind of like view it from the frame of like casting judgment on the previous versions of that person. Like, it's easy to say in hindsight this person was being self-centered in their grief, in their suffering, but I think there's also maybe a space for honoring the grief itself and the suffering itself as being kind of magnificent outrage, magnificent sorrow, and that has its purpose too. We wouldn't arrive at our current state of being closer to enlightenment if we hadn't experienced the previous sorrows. And perhaps that might go to the question of like the avoiding of, the goal isn't to avoid it, the goal is to deal with it and come to terms with it maybe in some way that's meaningful or healthy or beautiful even, but not to avoid it. So I just felt a little protective of the skinny lady and her desperation and her grief. I felt like I could very much honor that.
Good.
I agree with that. And I was going to add too, like, I feel like a lot of people, including myself before, like when somebody dies, like they don't want those terrible grief feelings to go away. Actually, I mean, on one hand I do, because it's wildly unpleasant. They also want it to stay, because it feels like a connection still to the person who died. You almost dread that day you wake up and it doesn't hurt as bad, because you're moving further and further away in time from them, which is more suffering. It's like suffering on top of suffering. That's one thought. My last thought was like, just as a whole, when I look back on my participation in this class, I always leave feeling like, God, that was helpful. Except for this one. I remember, and I love it, I appreciate it, I get it, I understand it, but I remember I emailed you so 9 months ago I experienced the most significant loss of my life to date, and I emailed him pretty new in the class. I was like, hey, can you send me any sort of material on grief at all? And he sent this one and I read it like, that's it? Like, get over it, everybody's hurting, which I know is not the message. It's not the message, but I feel like on one hand it's helpful, it's normalizing, and on the other hand it's like people showing up at the hospital, like every emergency is that person's individual nightmare. And just because everybody else has a nightmare doesn't make that one less painful and horrible. And it's just, it gives the vibe of like a nurse who's burnt out or something working at a busy hospital. You know what I mean? I don't know. Those are all my thoughts. They don't necessarily go together. But
That's good. Thank you.
One thing I was thinking about was we were talking about about holding on to the emotions or expressing your pain in an outward way. I remember once I was attended a funeral that the teacher conducted, and it was for a Vietnamese man who committed suicide. His wife was inconsolable. She was in the front row sitting on a pew, and everybody felt sorry for her. We could all sense her pain, but it was just so much coming out. And I remember, and this is why it brings me back to what Abel said, I remember that the teacher encouraging her to, I don't know the words he used, I don't know if you remember either, but he basically just encouraged her to just pull yourself in a little bit, right? You're going off to an extreme here. And I think what he was saying is we're not ignoring the fact that we're suffering and that we have, that we're feeling the pain from losing this person. But then there's a point where you go too far and then it's not about that at all anymore. It's about your own selfish need to release emotions of some sort, I guess. So maybe that comes back to kind of what you were saying. How do we find that middle spot? Because it's not like we want to, we just not feel pain, or we just say it doesn't matter. or be completely apathetic. But at the other end of the spectrum, we get where she was, which is where you go completely insane, right? Because you just can't handle it at all. You can't find a way out of it on your own. So I thought that was interesting, that because I just naturally felt for her. It's like, God, I want to cry for you too. And then when he was encouraging that to her, that was my first thing. It's like, well, how can you tell her not to express her pain? But I think that was the point he was trying to make, was that not to be overindulgent. Does that make sense? It was an interesting situation.
So
But
I'm
in,
sorry. Go ahead.
but in that moment, that woman or whoever it may be isn't thinking about, oh, I need this attention, that's why I'm crying as badly as I am. So they're doing it just because they don't know how to control themselves, because they've just, in her case, lost her husband who off themselves for whatever the reason may be. So is like is it like teacher was trying to say, everybody suffers, get over it?
No, I think he was trying to say, because your mind is in this certain state, you're not going to be able to process the things you need to process in order to get yourself through this, to come to grips. Because everything is a process. It starts and you get in the middle of the process and the process ends. By staying in the mind state that she was in, I think he realized that as long as she's that overcome with emotion, that might be hindering her, possibly. And I'm just guessing. I don't pretend to know what the teacher was thinking, but
I think my verses from the Dhammapada in some way will relate to this. Verse 13 and 14. An uncontrolled mind is like an ill-thatched house, right, where you allow passion to take over. But a well-controlled mind is like a well-thatched house. The passion has no control over.
you still have the compassion or the passion, but it doesn't overtake you, correct?
Right. In this case, Leah's going crazy because she's uncontrolled, according to the Dharma. So she allowed her passion of grief to take over.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, please. Okay. So for me, I've lost about the last 3 years, 3 people and my pets. And before that, I went through so much stuff, foster care, domestic violence, everything. But this year, I finally realized what the difference is between pain and suffering.
Bingo.
And so for me, I accept the pain, I accept what happened to me, but I no longer place myself in suffering. So it took me, I am 46 years old, and it took me even more pain to realize, I get it. It will work differently for everybody. Everybody's different. It's like people say, what's normal? What is normal? So for me, I learned this year, I was like, wow. It was like an enlightenment moment for me, a relief. And I no longer feel that pain anymore. But I felt it, I grieved it, I will miss them, but I could now move forward. I can't say that it's going to work for everybody that way, but it did for me this year. And I lost my birth mother this year, my brother last year, and then my work mother the year before that. And I got COVID originally without telling Meredith, and I got COVID again after getting surgery. So I was still going through all this stuff, and And I was at my breaking point, like, when is it enough? When is it going to be enough? And I can't tell you the day or what time it happened to me, but I accepted my pain. And I no longer feel the suffering anymore. So, when I first came here, that's when COVID really hit San Antonio, and there was no right treatment for it. But I'm here now.
Those were scary days, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have to share.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
The only truth is impermanence. Almost everything each of you have said can be answered by that phrase. The only truth is impermanence. The label or status is impermanent. The grief is impermanent. The life of that child is impermanent. I remember when I was a new father, and new fathers have that fear. What happens if my son dies while I'm asleep or while we're asleep? And it rules, that anxiety rules and really controls your decisions. And finally I turned towards the pain and I meditated on, and I experienced, what would it be like to lose my son? To wake up one morning, go to the crib, and see his body cold and lifeless. The pain that I experienced, even though it was just a meditation, was so intense that could only be expressed in a silent scream. That's the only way I could express what I felt. But confronting the impermanence of my son's life helps me appreciate his life now. I understand that at any moment I could return home tonight and my son could be gone. My daughter could be gone. And because that can happen at any moment, I appreciate them now, in the present. When my son talks for what seems like eternity about a video game that I have no interest in, I remind myself, this won't last. So the pain of listening to this won't last. And my son wanting to share something that he values like this, that won't last. So let me appreciate and be present. When my daughter wants to make me run behind her as she bikes and learns how to bike, which is where the phase we're in now, I remind myself, one, this won't last. All right, I won't be running forever. But I also won't have this experience forever. The only truth is impermanence. When my father died, there was another truth, not just impermanence, but the interconnectedness, the no self. I knew my father would go at any time. I knew that eventually my father would go, would die. And I felt the pain. But I also saw how much of my father was still present. That what left us was the configuration that we called Eddie. But so much of what was Eddie continued, just in a transformed state. And a lot of it continued through me, through memories. I can still hear his laugh. I can still feel the weight of his arm on my shoulders when he would give me a hug. So I still have those with me, and those parts of him are still here. But because I always reminded myself my father one day will die, I didn't have the regrets. I gave my father that hug, the kiss, the I love yous, every chance I had. So that when the time came, because I was mindful of impermanence, the pain of regret was not there. Because I knew it was not going to last. The pain stays for a while, but it's not the same as suffering. The loss of a child, the loss of a parent, those experiences will always be there. The suffering doesn't have to be. And it's not being cold, it's simply accepting it's impermanent. I can lose my son, my child at any time. So I'm going to value and be present. I'm going to make an effort to be present. I'm going to make an effort to not waste my energy on excess anxiety, excess crying, excess whatever. I'm going to work on being present, here and now.
Yeah, I think there is a difference like between, like get over it. I think when someone says like get over it, that means don't have those feelings, as opposed to you don't necessarily have to display it, or I think the teacher can't really speak for him, but I'm just speculating that he wasn't telling this lady not to feel that.
Right.
He's just saying
Right.
the over displays of emotion and all that is not necessary. You can still grieve without the display of
Right.
that. I don't think he meant get over it. I mean, obviously, that's
I'm sure
such a great
he
loss.
said it in the
So-
most compassionate way because he
Yeah.
was feeling her pain
Mhm.
and wanting her pain to be less, or he wouldn't have said anything at all. So.
The other part of the story that is analogous to a lot of our lives. The mother held on to the child on her hip and would not let the son go. That's analogous to our attachments. What are you attached to? What are you hoping will never leave you? What are you hoping will always stay? What are you grasping onto that you don't want to let go of? And recognizing that that's not accepting impermanence.
And finally taking her child to the charnel ground, which is the burial ground where the funeral pyres where they burn the bodies. Finally taking her child there to the charnel ground and covering him up there was her final release of just letting go of that fantasy that somehow she could bring him back to life and everything would be like it was before.
So that would be the homework for you for this next 2 weeks until we meet again. What are you attached to? What are you holding on to on your hip that you're not letting go of? What are you not accepting as impermanent? And how is that creating and cultivating suffering in you?
The other thing that occurs to me is the amazing insight that